Hello and welcome to RiskOps AI CXO Speaker Series. My name is Andrew Beagley and I'm the SVP of Client Solutions here at RiskOps AI. Now, today I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Murray. Until very recently, Chris was a partner at PwC in London, and in the market-facing division was the CTO for the risk practice. So welcome, Chris. It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. So maybe just give us a little bit more context and background of yourself.
Well, great to be here, Andrew. Yeah, I've been in technology all my career. Started out as a software developer, then a consultant. As you said, was a partner at PwC and had a couple of CTO roles there. But I've been delighted to be an independent advisor in the last few months. And, we've spoken a number of times in my role working with RiskOps AI as well. So delighted to be here.
Great, thank you. So, Chris, you're kind of in a very interesting position in that you've been at the crossroads of so many different client engagements. You've really got the finger on the pulse with what's going on in the cyber industry, as it were. Talk about some of the top of mind threats and challenges that organizations are facing today.
Yeah, I mean, from a cyber perspective, ransomware is still the top threat. Average demands over $5 million. In the news very recently with Marks and Spencers and others in the UK, which really has demonstrated how one breach can paralyze operations for weeks, and it's really, really a huge impact on that organization. I think we've got IP theft and data exfiltration. Increasingly state-linked actors targeting sensitive sectors is on the rise. Supply chain attacks, 60% of breaches now originate from third parties. And of course, we can't talk about anything in the technology space looking at AI and deep fake fraud and business email compromise and, also faking executive members, team members has been something we've seen a rise in. And of course, AI is supercharging all of that impersonation.
It's interesting, Chris, to hear you describe some of those examples. Talk a bit about how well aligned organizations' cyber risk management programs are to the business itself. It just seems like there's still this massive disconnect between all of this kind of frontline effort and actually how the business is run itself. Just give us a bit of perspective around that.
Still not aligned enough. PwC's 2024 CEO survey highlighted that only 14% of CEOs feel extremely exposed to cyber risk, even with all the threats I just talked about. Conversely, cyber consistently ranks amongst their top concerns in that survey. And, cyber is always on the agenda, but fewer than half of CISOs feel the risk is being communicated effectively across leadership. So there is this gap. We need to be able to translate cyber risk more effectively into business language. It's somewhat siloed and put in a technology corner at the moment. And yet, as we've seen with all of the recent, events that it can have a massive impact on business operations. And I guess that's where platforms like RiskOps AI come in. They help turn the risk into something quantifiable so that organizations can understand the financial, reputational and compliance risks that they're facing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, I'd be interested in your perspective on how proactive a lot of organizations' programs are today. Something that we see when we have discussions with companies is that in many respects they're still very reactive. They're based on kind of piecemeal data sources, disparate data sources. Nothing seems particularly joined up, and there's always this kind of tendency to kind of second guess what the exposure is. Talk about the importance of being able to get onto the front foot using an AI native approach, using more automation, and getting yourself into a position where you can be performing, continuous compliance assessments to then to be able to start to quantify and prioritize risk in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about data, that's critical at the heart of it. And as you said, I mean, I'm reflecting your words back at you, Andrew, but, there are so many, the plethora of tools, endpoint, cloud, identity, third party, but often no unified view of how secure they really are, how organizations are managing threat on an ongoing continuous basis. And I think as well as some of the ownership of those solutions are also federated in organizations. So, there's a challenge there around how does the organizational structure land to help bring all of that together. Cyber has to be about continuous compliance and continuous threat exposure management. It's just not effective enough to have static point in time audits, just doesn't reflect the pace of real world risk. Interestingly, I was reading a Gartner report, and by 2026, they reckon CTM adopters will be 3 times less likely to suffer a breach. So, I think this is, without putting too fine a point on it, again, RiskOps AI provides a way to operationalize CTM, and by continuously testing controls, automating compliance, and mapping maturity. And I think, as we talked about before, then turning that into the language of the boardroom is going to help
Mm.
organizations manage the risk more effectively.
Just picking up one of your observations about how, in many respects, different functions and activities are still siloed within organizations. Talk about the potential value of bringing, say, security and compliance and risk all into one place.
I see it all the time in the conversations I've had with organizations over a reasonably long period. Is that the underlying data that they're using has definite reusability, shall we say, across a number of different risk and compliance processes, but often the ownership for those is segregated. Therefore, you have to try and come up a level in the organization to find who's the owner for the whole picture. Often that will stop with the COO or the CFO. But it's very difficult for them to make sense of all of this. But what we know is that the data, the underlying data, can be reused for so many of different compliance purposes, whether it's managing cyber risk, whether it's overall risk management for the organization, or whether it's compliance with regulation. So I think having solutions that bring data sets together, kind of normalize that information and present it in a meaningful way to organizations is going to be the way to go. Because actually, rewiring the whole infrastructure of organizations is just too big a problem to solve for most organizations in one go. So, having something that lays over the top, like RiskOps AI, bringing that data together, normalizing it, allowing it to be presented in a sensible and business friendly way, actually is going to make a huge difference.
Chris, it's interesting, how you're referencing multiple different stakeholders within the organization that all have an interest in making sure that there's a single source of truth, that there's a centralized, near real-time view of risk exposure, right? Whether you're the chief risk officer or the CISO, the chief information officer, I mean, or the chief financial officer. At the end of the day, everybody at the top table has to have, a transparent and up-to-date understanding of what is going on in the cyber risk space.
Well, it's interesting because they always have a slightly different need and a different view of it. My dad used to tell me this story about a professor who used to tell him that, if you have different people who are blind feeling an elephant, they'll all give you a different perspective of what the elephant is, but the elephant's still an elephant. And, the CISO wants control telemetry, the CFO wants quantified financial exposure, CIO wants to ensure the tools are efficient, the CRO wants to monitor system and third party risk. So you've got these different perspectives, but actually the underlying data and the underlying problems are coming. If you can bring that data together in the setting, we talk about single source of truth, then you can present the views to the various stakeholders relevant to their needs and their particular roles.
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris, and I'm sure you've seen this in your prior roles. But yeah, sometimes in organizations, there's a reluctance to invest more money in this space on the basis that organizations already have many tools and applications. There may be redundancy, overlap, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, talk a bit about the value using AI to be able to tie all of these different legacy tools together to create this more holistic view. In other words, as an accelerator, making better use of what you have today rather than throwing out of the window or starting from scratch, but really kind of making better sense, getting people into a position where they can, frankly, save money, but get, better use out of what they've got.
I think a lot of the large systems providers have come at it from the perspective of, enterprise applications, which require a rewiring of process, require a lot of integration, come with a big price tag, and often that's just, that's painfully slow for organizations. And as you mentioned, it requires significant investment. The ability to execute quickly, come in with a solution that brings data together, powered by AI, in the way that RiskOps AI does, means that you can get to value very, very quickly. You can, see, quantify risk in a very short time scale by ingesting data from a number of different disparate data sources and leveraging the power of AI and, and the models to bring that together in a sensible way. I think that's not just a risk operations issue. I think this is enterprise wide, and I think we're going to see a lot of solutions in other areas that do very similar things, that look across enterprise data sets, use AI to power how they normalize that data and bring it together and present sensible views to stakeholders for them that are relevant to their needs.
One final thought. There's no question we're at a defining moment in terms of the risk landscape, the regulatory landscape, the threats and challenges that organizations are facing today. What advice would you give to whether you're to a CISO, a CIO, a chief risk officer about how they should approach next steps, how to make better use of what they're doing today? Put it another way, we're both former practitioners, don't feel so alone in this space. How do you go about kind of moving things along and getting your organization into a better place?
I think I would flip that round to say there's opportunity there. Shared ownership that can help lift the burden, and I think the CISO being able to present to business stakeholders a business view of what they're dealing with every day, and doing that on a continuous basis. I mean, I would say that's not just helping you sleep at night, but but also, knowing that you've got that, well, I was going to say safety net, but it's more about knowing that you're, an integral part of how the business views. It's the importance, the existential importance of making sure these risks are managed effectively, and not just leaving it to you, but seeing how they then need to bring in, all aspects of that, into the organization. So business continuity plans and all of the pieces that need to come into place to make sure that these risks are managed effectively. So yeah, I think being able to talk the language of business from a CISO's perspective and connect more holistically across the organization, its financials, operations, and so forth, will mean you're less alone.
Chris, those are terrific insights. Thank you very much. I mean, you have masses of experience out there on the front line. We look forward to continuing the discussion, but for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.